Hey, good morning or afternoon or evening, everyone. John Moore here. This is another episode of Shaman's Tent doing this on a rare Monday morning. I know I don't always do these on Mondays. Normally, Friday's a good day for me. Usually, I think I did two of these last week, Wednesday and Friday, something like that. Anyway, um, thought I would do one today on actually how to find your inner self. Like this is a critical part of good morning. Good morning again. Um this is a critical part of most spiritual journeys. Is it the end of the spiritual journey? I don't think so. I don't think it is. And I think you can keep going. I think you can keep going forever and ever and ever. It's just that this is a pretty large stepping stone, and there's a good reason for that. And the reason is that we have a thing called ego, and we all have it. We all have ego. The Dalai Lama has ego. Um, no, I have not met nor heard of anyone who is completely egoless who is still operating a body and a mind. Um, so I'm going to spend a lot of time this morning talking about what the ego is. So because it's important to understand that so we know how to drop behind the ego, which is one of the ways to start to find your inner self. And what do we like what's there? Why do we want to find the inner self? What treasures are hidden away there for us? Um well, the truth is it's a part of becoming more spiritual. And what do I mean by that? To me, my definition of spirituality is anything, yeah, my definition of spiritual or spirituality is anything that gives us the experience of something greater than ourselves. Whether that's, non-dual experience, connection to the infinite, oneness with the Godhead, whatever terminology works for you. Um, and in that regard, any activity can become spiritual the deeper we go into it. An example I like to use is if you ever watch somebody who's really, really spectacular at something they do, like a professional basketball player or gymnast or artist or whatever, somebody who's just completely focused, completely at one when they're doing, and then they've stepped into flow with what they're doing. That activity has gone beyond the mind and body at that point. That activity becomes a spiritual activity. This is why I come from a martial arts background. This is why a lot of martial arts have a spiritual component to them, because to get really, really good in martial, you go, yeah. First, you have to learn some techniques, and you can practice those basics for the rest of your life, and get really, really good at them. And there will come a point in time where your ego steps out of the way if you're doing it right, where your ego steps out of the way and the art is kind of moving through you and you feel this greater connection. And this is one of the reasons why there's a great deal of spirituality and martial arts kind of tied together as well. At least in my experience, not always, not in every situation, not every school has a spiritual component. Mine certainly did. We had ceremony and meditation and all kinds of things, and then we punched and kicked each other. um, but it's true that the deeper you get into anything, I believe, the more spiritual it gets. Look at a fantastic piece of art. Look at or watch somebody painting a really fantastic piece of art. Look at some of these masters. I'm a big fan of surrealism. Two of my favorite artists are Dali and Magritte. and look at their work, and you can feel a spiritual component to their work. But even look at realistic painters or artists of any kind, and you can feel that, right? You can drop beyond that. Yeah, right. That's you know, um, as somebody who clearly, judging by your channel name anyway, you're training martial arts, so you understand. Now, my martial arts teacher, my main teacher, I was with for, got my third degree black belt from my teaching license. Um, he would have us perform frequently the same movement for 3 hours straight, 3, 4 hours sometimes. Just do the same movement over and over again. And um, what would happen is that after about 10 minutes of doing the same movement, your mind would start to scream and say, what am I doing? This is boring. I can't stand this. This is ridiculous. When are we going to stop? And sometime later, 20 minutes later or something, the mind would give up and drop away. And that was the point, I guess. The mind would give up and drop away, and the movement was just happening. It was just happening effortlessly. And, it was working through muscle memory, but also like the ego stopped resisting. So this is where I start to talk about ego a little bit. Um, Ego's the thing. Now, in my in my own personal spirituality, there are no there is not what we would consider, there aren't enemies, right? Now, this is a challenging thing because most Western forms of spirituality and that sort of thing, um, there's this very black and white view. There's good and evil. There are adversaries, right? But they're not enemies. And we can turn our adversaries into allies. So the word Satan, as a matter of fact, let's take that. That means adversary. It's not my understanding of Jewish beliefs about Satan is that it's not a person, it's a title. It means adversary and is often internal. Our adversaries are often internal. And this has been my experience through um, shamanism, through tantric Buddhism, that our demons are in here, right? We like to externalize them. It makes us feel good to say the devil made me do it, or I you know I robbed that bank because I was possessed by demons. um, n- we like to externalize all of that stuff. The truth of the matter is nothing's really external. All of our experience is happening in our consciousness, and so these things, these adversaries, are often, and I'm not saying there aren't troublesome spirits out there or that sort of thing, but I don't find this clear black and white distinction to be very, once you get to a certain point, it's not very useful, right? And so I have heard spiritual teachers say things like, the ego is the enemy. Your ego is the enemy. It's like the devil. It's the closest thing to Satan. It's hell. It's blah blah blah. Right? The ego. Um, I'm like, okay, well, what is the ego? Why does it exist then? And why do I have one? And people talk about ego death, ego annihilation. That's not a very peaceful way of doing spirituality, trying to kill off a part of yourself. Um, but instead, I think a saner, in my view, way of approaching ego is we want to relax it. We want we want to stop identifying with ego. We want to know the ego's function and that it's lying to us a lot of the times. So let's talk about what the ego is so that we can learn to drop behind the ego into our inner self. And this has been a real key for me. So we incarnate into this world to have an experience of being a separate self. We When we are born, when a baby is born, yeah, that's exactly it, right? Shunning your shadow. The shadow will always come out. It is a part of you, and the shunning part is what creates the shadow in the first place. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't, and we know, or you can find out for yourself that what keeps us in a state of suffering are attachments and aversions, right? Things that we attach to, our ego, our identity, and things we push away. I'm trying to push my ego away. And so here's a real key. Here is I'm going to give a I don't know, not so secret meditation technique out right now. um, uh, Sit and relax and allow everything to be exactly as it is. Take present moment awareness, allow everything to happen just as it is. Do not resist anything, do not judge anything. Just sit and be. Um, that's, you know, so often, like, I see something, oh my God, like it snowed last night here. We had, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches of snow. I'm looking out and oh my gosh, that snow. I'm like pushing away the snow. I don't want to go out in the snow. I don't want to shovel the snow. I don't want to drive in the snow. So just the snow is causing disruption in my system. What if I sit here and just gaze out and have no attachment or aversion to that snow? It just is, just as I am. Okay. And we can do the same thing with everything, with our thoughts that arise. So when we're born into this world, as infants, as babies, we have no idea of the separate self. Like everything seems to be a part of us. We seem to be a part of this giant flow of sensation, right? And we have a couple of instincts. We can cry when we're hungry. And then we start to realize that these large objects that move towards us when we cry give us food. And one of the things that's really interesting is that universally, so in every culture that we've looked at, the idea of bigness, largeness, also means important, right? In Japanese, I'm wearing my Tokyo T-shirt right now. In in Japanese, right, they have the word or the particle o. So we'd say like o daikyo is a like big drum, big important drum. But you also have, you know, from Aikido, you had o sensei, like great, big, important means the same thing. And English, we have the big boss, right? The big is important, and that comes from, we believe, from um, babies experiencing adults feeding them, so necessary for their survival, and that becomes important, and that's cross cultural. So we start to learn, and then we start to hear sounds, and some of those patterns of sounds, when we react to them, the big people that feed us act really happy and give us more love, and eventually we learn that some of those sounds are a name, right? Our name, right? And in English we say I'm John, or I say I'm John. In other languages, we say I'm called, or my name is, or some other form of that. But in English, we strongly identify with our names. And so we start to build this idea of who we are, right? And we add to it throughout our whole life. And they're just ideas, right? Even this body, okay, I've got this body's, 51 years old, and I wear glasses so I can see better. And Whether that is objectively true or not, those are just stories and beliefs. And that's what our ego is. Our ego is a collection of stories and beliefs about ourselves, about who we are as a separate individual. And that makes a big difference because that separate individual is different than the world, different than the universe, not connected to anything, which is not the underlying truth of it. Why do we have an ego? Why is it necessary for us to develop an ego? Well, ego is a survival mechanism for this body mind, right? If I am a separate individual and I am important, and these things that I say about and it is important for my survival that my model of the world and who I am are true, right? You want to see, like, religious violence, for example, which we can see throughout history and all over the world, is about, if you're right, that makes me wrong. If I'm wrong, that destroys my model of how the universe is, and that is an existential threat to me. So I am going to go wipe your people out over there. So religious warfare, common. It's going on right now in the Middle East, probably in other places. Um, History of the human species. If my ideas about the world are wrong, then that is a threat to my life. So I better kill the people who have different beliefs than I do. That is the way of the world. That is one of the ways that we separate ourselves. So any threat to our ego, any threat to, and I'll give an example from my own life, any threat to our ego, any threat to our self concept of who we think we are, feels like an existential threat. It feels like it's going to end us. Um, yeah. Um, there's a thing in spirituality with names, with like choosing a magical name. And I have been, I'll put it this way, I've been given magical names by different organizations. I don't use them. And in a lot of people who do what I do choose names that are marketing, that are based on marketing. I see a lot of people using the word shaman like it's a name, shaman so and so, shaman. My name is Shaman Bill, like it's Uncle Bill or something like that. And I'm not going to judge anybody for that. It just never, it never felt that authentic to me to do something like that. So it's kind of weird. Why is my ego telling me this rather than feeling it's a burden, something to rid myself of? Well, think about it this way. Why would so first of all, don't try to rid yourself of your ego. I don't agree with that approach, like ridding yourself of your ego. What I do agree with is to stop identifying with your ego, stop saying this is who I am, and understand that you have an ego and that is a tool for survival of your body mind. So, but your ego lies to you. Your ego will use any tool necessary to make you survive, including lying to you about who you are and what you are and that sort of thing. Oh, you might have. Sorry. Sorry. Oh, I did. People's ego can serve a different purpose than others, and ever since I've approached mine with curiosity rather than Oh, yeah, okay, yes. Um, yeah, so the ego has different functions. Its main function is to keep your body and mind alive, right? And also to allow you to experience the world as a differentiated individual, right? We don't have a hive mind. We aren't bees or ants or whatever. To some extent, although you can predict patterns of human movement through a space by by observing ants. I used to work I lived and worked in Boston and I used to have to walk through South Station to get to my job. And unfortunately, my job was in a building that was I had to cross through lines of people coming off of commuter trains through South Station. If you stood, you could stand in the path that people normally walk, which isn't, it's not delineated in any way. It's just people are just following the crowd mindlessly, getting off their train, going to work. People would run into you. You could stare them in the eyes, and they would walk right into you like you weren't there. Like they didn't see you. They checked out. They become really unconscious. Yes. Yes, they do, and very cool. Ants are amazing. Oh, ants, bees, they're all really, really amazing. And they do have there are studies comparing human and ant behavior. So, as I was talking about this pathway, and then I read an article about ants following chemical trails and that sort of thing, and they were using models of ant behavior to predict like traffic patterns with human beings and stuff. Um, Yeah, so mushrooms are, well, I don't have to tell you guys, mushrooms are absolutely amazing and even provide communication, like trees communicate through mycelium under the ground and pass nutrients back and forth through the mycelium underground. So mushrooms are a super important part of our ecosystem and amazingly cool. They're like a nervous system for nature. Super, super cool stuff. Anyway, sorry. It's very easy for me to get off topic. Somebody recently complained that me taking comments in these things is too distracting. I apologize if that's the case, but I think the comments really, really contribute. You all really, really contribute to what I'm talking about, and I learn stuff, and you can learn stuff from each other, and so I'm not going to stop taking comments. And the interactive part of this is a really important part of it. So, anyway, my apologies if you find it distracting. As somebody with ADHD, I'm easily distracted as well. But and speaking of which, I'm gonna have a little sip of coffee here. Um, so, um, So a really important aspect in spirituality is just to recognize the ego for what it is, and it's the same thing with the shadow, right? Recognize the shadow for what it is. Don't treat it like an enemy. Don't put The more we push things away, the more we resist things. Jung said, "What we resist persists." Right? It's like I learned this because I went through years of chronic pain, and I'm not one to take medication. Like I don't even regularly take like Tylenol or anything like that for pain, unless it's if I have a high fever or something, I'll take something to bring it down. Um, but went through years of chronic pain, and what I found out was, the pain, my perception of the pain was very flexible, but also not just the perception of it, but how I was interpreting the pain. If I went into pain thinking, here's another here's another spiritual secret. Write this down. Um, a very spiritual perspective to take on anything is, isn't that interesting, right? So I would have some pain, my hip, my knee, my leg, whatever, and say, "Isn't that interesting?" And then they would like dive into it and explore and just allow it to be there and explore it and try to pinpoint the exact location of the pain you're finding. It's very hard to do. Even if you have an injury and you know where the pain is coming from, if you in your mind put your attention into it and go really, really into it, you can't it's I don't want to say impossible. I don't know if anything's impossible, but when I would do that, my perception of that would change significantly. Yeah. Um, uh, l- Plants. trees, all kinds of plants will communicate, and we're finding more and more about that as well. Um, the coffee, yes. Um, and for those who don't know, caffeine, yeah, it does wake me up in the morning, but caffeine is actually because it's a stimulant, it actually helps with ADHD. It's sort of paradoxical, right? You think of people with ADHD as being like hyperactive and all over the place, and coffee makes that worse. Um, it actually helps bring focus in. Plus, I just love coffee. Um, I love coffee. Like I drink black coffee, and people are like, "How can you drink black coffee?" I'm like, "Because I like coffee. I like the flavor of coffee. I like the smell of coffee. It doesn't have to be sweet or whatever." Um, but I've been drinking black coffee, for my almost my entire life since I was in high school, probably. So hard for me to drink coffee with sweetener or cream or anything in that. Um, Yeah, so there's a reason why they give Ritalin and Adderall to people with ADHD. Those are powerful stimulants. In fact, they're amphetamines. Um, so they help people focus. I've never taken Adderall or um, Ritalin or anything like that, but caffeine is my drug of choice, I guess. Yeah, yeah. Yes, and I'm sure you've read Paul Stamets. Highly recommend it if people are interested in mushrooms to read Mycelium Rising or just watch talks by Paul Stamets. He's probably, he's definitely one of the leading experts in mushrooms, if not the leading expert in mushrooms in the world. And he talks about psychedelic mushrooms as well. Yeah, yeah, Secret Life of Plants. I haven't read it, but I am aware of it, and yeah, absolutely fascinating. Plants like um, when you cut your lawn, when you cut grass or whatever, the scent that it gives off is a chemical warning. Actually, um, yeah, Paul Stamets is amazing, and he's working on stuff like mycoremediation using mushrooms to clear toxic waste out of soil and stuff like that. And they're learning how to build like even like buildings out of mycelium. They can populate a brick form with mushroom spores and have it grow into a shape. And it's because mycelium has a immune system like animals do, and in fact, um, plants and mushroom people are closer to mushrooms on the genetic line than they are to plants. So mushrooms and animals diverged from the tree of life genetically much later than plants and mushrooms did. So we are closer to mushrooms than we are to plants. Mushrooms breathe oxygen as opposed to carbon dioxide. Well, all fungus. I mean, there's lots of different types of fungus, but and they have a digestive system. The mycelium digest. They just happen to digest on the outside. They have an external digestion system using all kinds of cool enzymes and stuff. Um, we'll do a whole thing on mushrooms at some point. Not just psychedelic mushrooms, although certainly certainly lots of shamanic peoples use psychedelic mushrooms, and there's a theory that one of the ways that human beings developed our complex large brains is that we were exposed to psychedelic plants and mushrooms very early on, which made us capable of symbolic thought. um, Interesting stuff. I don't know the truth of it or whatever, but it's a good theory. It's called the I think it's Paul McKenna came up with it. I'm not sure, but Paul McKenna, is that the right name? No, that can't be the right name. Whatever. It's the stoned ape theory. Something to observe. That when human beings were apes, they found some mushrooms, they ate them, they tripped. Started their brains to develop in different ways to uh, become more plastic, and then our cranium sizes grew, and there we are. Terrence McKenna, yes, thank you. I was thinking Paul McKenna, and I'm like, Paul McKenna is a hypnotist, he's written a bunch of books. So that was right. Terrence McKenna, thank you. See, this is why we have comments. This is why people keep me on the straight and narrow. Um, so let's get back to, since the topic for today is how to find your inner self. Um, uh, let's talk about that a little more. Let's talk about getting into ego a little bit, um, and getting out of ego a little bit. So our ego is this useful thing that keeps this body mind operating and safe, and helps it navigate in the world. But it's not our true self. It's not our true inner self. And so it keeps us away from deep spiritual realization. And this is why um, a lot of spirituality takes a scorched earth approach to the ego. Your ego is the devil. You have to annihilate your ego. You have to kill your ego once and for all. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. You will experience, if you do deep work, you will experience points in time where the ego drops away. And they are beautiful, beautiful, expansive, connected, non dual experiences. And maybe you can hold on to that state for some period of time. I think the longest for me being in a non-dual state was several weeks, actually. And the tricky part of that is, um, most people do not become permanently enlightened the first time they reach that state. It doesn't stick. I don't know why that is. Adyashanti wrote a book about that called Falling from Grace, I believe. Um, and many people, particularly if they have any kind of Christian background, will call that state, that non-dual state, a state of grace. I like it. I'll use it from time to time. The state of grace, or the state of non-duality. Non-duality is when ego drops away and you just experience, it's very hard to describe. Everything's just happening, including what you're saying and doing is just happening. You're not the doer. You're not doing anything except for observing, except for experiencing. All experiences arise in your awareness, and it is blissful. It's beautiful. It's Imagine how relaxed you can be if you're not responsible for it. This is a tough thing to describe. If you're not responsible for anything, that includes, that doesn't mean that as an individual you can do whatever you want and you don't have repercussions for that. This is the tricky part here, right? You're still responsible for your actions, but imagine that you don't have to take control of anything. And this is a meditation technique that I teach sometimes, right? Where when we're sitting in meditation, let go of controlling anything, including your body. This doesn't mean relax your bladder and pee your pants in meditation. It doesn't mean stop breathing. It means that you identify as you. When you say I, when you go deep in here and you find that I that's behind the ego and you identify with it, it's not controlling anything. It doesn't need to. It's there just observing. Yes, that is a great way to put it. Use your ego as a tool instead of a guide. The ego will steer us wrong, not because it's bad or evil. It's got its role, right? I think an awakening, an intellectual awakening for me, was when I had kids. and they were little and they were toddlers. I had twins, so double trouble. And they were toddlers and they would throw a tantrum about who knows what, right? You know, um, and I was reading stuff about kids' behavior and that sort of thing. And one of the things they said about kids is that all behavior, all things have a positive intention. Even a tantrum is about trying to get attention or trying to get their needs met, or something's wrong in the world, and so they're trying their hardest to get those needs met. They're not doing it in a way that we like. And apply that to us, apply that to adults, apply that to every human being. Everything about you has a positive intention, including your ego, including your shadow. Your shadow has a positive intention. Your reactivity, when you become triggered, has a positive intention behind it. It's trying to keep you safe. Is it doing it in a way that we like, or in a way that we would choose, or a way that we prefer? No. And this is why if you treat it, if you resist it, if you treat it as an enemy, it's probably going to act up worse. But if we sit in a state of allowing and being the witness, as we say here, I am the watcher. I am the witness. Absolutely. If we allow it, if we just observe your ego, it's another deep meditation, because to take the observer position means we have to take a step back. I can't I tell people, it's like you've got a mural painted on the wall and you want to see the mural and take it in. You can't do that with your nose up against it, right? You're not going to see anything. You have to take a step back. So when I take a step back from my ego and I take an observer position, or I take a step back from my emotions and I observe them, I am stepping back closer to my inner self, closer to my true self. And this stuff that's going on, even identification with the body, identification with the mind, identification with thoughts, with feelings, all of that stuff starts to loosen up, right? It's an ego loosening rather than an ego annihilation. Um, I would, you know, I personally would like to get away from spirituality that has enemies, even if those enemies are internal, right? I don't want to other myself. I don't want to other people. I don't want to other, I don't want to externalize and say, these demons made me do this. I don't want to look inside and say, I've got a shadow and it's evil. I'm Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which, by the way, is a book about the shadow before I think the term was started to be used in psychoanalysis. But there was a recognition of a dual nature of people, but the belief was that beneath our cultured exterior was this seething demon inside, because people have buried, particularly coming out of the Victorian era, or certain eras in history, the Victorian era being one of them, repressing everything, shove everything down inside, shove your desires down inside, right? This doesn't mean I advocate acting out on things that would hurt other people. I don't. But I use this example a lot. Somebody cuts me off, say somebody cuts me off in traffic, and my, you know, blood boils and I have the desire to punch that person in the nose, right? If I welcome that up and say, here's the spiritual tactic. Oh, that's interesting. Where did that come from? That gives me an opportunity to not fight that, you know, and say, I'm going to push that down. Oh, I can't punch somebody in the nose. I'm going to push that down. I'm not going to go punch somebody in the nose. That's not going to happen. Even if that desire comes up. But if I push it down, that desire doesn't go away. And it might get hidden where someday I react out of, unconsciously and punch somebody in the nose. Yeah. Yes. Enemies and allies. That's it. We like to see the world. It's very easy, very, very easy to see the world in black and white terms. It just doesn't exist that way. Nothing exists that way. Nothing is absolute, except, when I say nothing is absolute, it's kind of funny. It's kind of an oxymoron, right? Um, you know, these people good, these people bad, right? We see that with bigotry, right? People with this skin color, people with this religion, people with this sexual identity, people with this, um, who came from this country, people who can't, who, whatever. I am going to pile a bunch of preconceived notions onto you so you can be the other. And this goes back to, our early days of survival where, there was competition over resources and, you know, how do we identify the people who aren't part of our tribe and they're trying to take our watering hole and our good hunting grounds and those kinds of things. We don't need to do that anymore, right? Um, and so we don't want to do that with ourselves. We want to love ourselves, right? And love, here's a spiritual definition of love. Love is acceptance, is unconditional acceptance, unconditional approval. I approve of myself unconditionally. Are there things that I do, thoughts that come up, that sort of thing that I don't like? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's part of the human experience. But do I reject myself because of that? Or do I say there are parts of myself that are bad? Well, that's not love. And that's true for it's not spiritual love from the pure definition of spiritual love. Spiritual love, and I almost always sign off for my videos saying I love you guys. And that just means I sit in full acceptance and approval of you. Not that you need my approval or acceptance, but um, I want that for you. I want every person to feel that. And if that is at all helpful, great. And if it's not, I'm going to do it anyway. Because it makes me feel better. It makes me feel better. So in um in my training, not in my learning, but also the way that I teach my students, particularly students who are going to go on to become shamanic healers, which is, a fair number of my students are interested in seeing clients. Some people study shamanism these days just for personal spiritual development, and that's totally fine. Um, in fact, that was how my start was I have zero interest in working with other people. And here I am today. I started studying shamanism only for um, my own benefit. And it turned out I really loved working with other people. So one of the things that I teach and that was taught to me is about holding space for other people. And my teacher, one of the things I really admired about her was that she could have a circle of 20, 30, 50 people, and she kept a tight circle. She set up rules at the very beginning of any class that she was teaching or any circle she was leading. And she kept those rules. And she was, at the time, she was in her early 70s when I met her. And she very kind, very compassionate, very loving, but also had that strict kind of parent hand going on as well. We are not going to do this in this circle. Like she would not condone any sort of disruption or anything like that. And it was actually a lovely experience, and I admire her so much for her teaching style and stuff. But one of the things that she taught from the very beginning, one of the rules that she would outline in every single class I took, in every single circle, and something that I've done when I've taught classes, or and something that I pass on, is about holding space. And so in circle, people can get really emotional sometimes. Stuff comes up. Holy crap. You start to touch the deep, dark recesses of you. And, you've got buried trauma there. You've got wounds there. You've got ancestral stuff. You've got all kinds of stuff going on. And that can surface. And people can break down and start crying. And she would put up her hand and say, set the rule at the very beginning: we do not rescue people here. If somebody is having a moment, they're breaking down, they're crying, whatever, allow them. Sit and hold space for them, meaning you sit non-judgmentally. This is like, if I can teach anybody a healing practice with no spiritual background whatsoever, no psychological background whatsoever, sit with somebody in non-judgment while they're having emotions, or they're having difficult emotions. Listen to them non-judgmentally. Don't try to fix them. Don't try to make them feel better. What's really going to make them feel better is processing their emotions with somebody observing them who is non-judgmental. I cannot express how deep healing goes if that's all you do. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Students cannot learn in a chaotic classroom. I know I can. And there were a couple of times where I've observed things that were somewhat disruptive and watched how she handled them very quietly. And um, someday I hope to be as good a teacher as she was. And so, I work on that, but I took a lot of lessons from her and admire her. So, you never know what you're going to get with a room full of kids. Not that I haven't taught a lot of kids, and I didn't like when I was teaching martial arts, I didn't do kids classes too much. Um, but I've spent time, like my mom was a school teacher and I spent time in her classroom. And then when my kids were coming up and they were young, I would volunteer in their classroom and stuff. So, and by the way, I don't care what you say, teachers are underpaid in this country. Wow. You want to think that teachers are making big money and all this stuff? Go spend a week in a kindergarten. Um, they are not paid enough. Let me put it that way. But it's very different, right? Because most kids will listen to the authority figure, who's the teacher at the front of the room. Yes, they act up and you're like, okay, nope, sit down. And that's frequently all that's required. Um, Middle school is a whole different story. High school is a different story. Adults, adults have very solid egos, and many of them want to think they're in charge. And many of them, this has happened to me teaching shamanism. This has happened to me teaching martial arts. This has happened to me teaching. I used to teach computer science programming classes. Um, there will always, not always, but there's often one or two adults in the room who want to show everybody how much they know, and so try to take over a class. And you can't allow that to happen. You can't, because I remember getting frustrated once with somebody, an adult acting up in a class like that and going, look, I didn't pay for this class to come here and listen to your ego try to sound important. I get it. You know a lot of stuff. But I paid to hear this teacher speak, and every minute that you're speaking over them, or whatever, I am not getting what I paid for. And what I've, not just in money, but in investing my time. And so I find that as a student, I find it really frustrating, like disruptions, very frustrating. But that's ego acting up. Ego needs to feel important. You are important. You may not feel important, but you are important as an individual, right? It's weird. It's the paradox, right? Your individual being, body, mind, is important, but also passing beneath that, behind that. So a lot of people and a lot of spiritual practices are It's like they're reaching out for something, right? I need to get to this external state, this enlightenment, this samadhi, this merger with God, and God's out there somewhere up in the sky looking down. Um, which is interesting. The word deity, which is another word for God, right? The word deity, the word Zeus, the word Jupiter, a bunch of terms, the word deva. So all of these words from different cultures come from the same root word, which is or root, root name, which is proto Indo European, which was, the mother tongue that most European languages came out of, and Sanskrit and all this stuff. Like thousands of years ago, there was some culture somewhere that was mobile. They rode horses. There are a lot of words in PIE for horses, and so we have, reconstructed using linguistic rules some of the language. And so we know there was a god to these people called Deus Pater. Pater, as you might imagine, we get from Latin, we get paternal, right? We also get the word father in English from that. It means father. And Dies is also where we get, I think, the word day from, but it means sky, or the morning sky. So the god that we get deity, the word deity, and the word Zeus, the word Jupiter from, basically means, I like to joke, and that it means sky daddy. Dies Pater was a god to the Proto-Indo-European people that constructed. And we can't completely construct their beliefs and stuff, but we can understand certain things about the language using linguistic rules. So the identity of a god being out there in the sky, and the stars, the planets, all of those things, that comes from thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, from hunter gatherers, right? So this idea that heaven is up and hell is down, and which is not particularly as shamanically accurate anyway. um but we're reaching for stuff outside of ourselves, and that's a very divine masculine impulse to reach out. But reaching out is what we're doing when we evolve personally, right? We're evolving personally by projecting out, reaching out. We're reaching out for things. We're reaching out for spiritual experiences or knowledge or whatever. We all reflect the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Those are within us. The divine feminine is then when we go back inside and we recognize that we allow, and we become this field, we become this fertile womb for creation. Yeah, Deus Pater, God the Father, that's the Latin. Um, when they spell it in Proto-Indo-European, they use these weird phonetic characters. But the word deus has the same root as the word Zeus in Greek, and Jupiter, believe it or not, or Jove is another word for Jupiter, in in uh, in Latin. And back then, you know I'm sorry if you hear that. My dog is whining. What do you want? What do you want? I don't know what my dog wants. I do have to sign off in a couple of moments, but probably to let my dog out. She's whining at me. She probably wants to go play in the snow, if I had to guess. So anyway, what I'm talking about is a going inside, which is a aspect of our divine feminine. And this is where we go inside and we relax and we allow, as opposed to efforting, reaching out, projecting. Okay. We bring our attention inward. And this is how we start to find our inner self. We start to find our inner self by, and here's a meditation practice. I'll describe it. I won't lead you through it because it would take too long. Um, But this is a meditation practice that I developed that I've been teaching for some time. So we start to disidentify, we start to unravel the attachment to ego. We're not annihilating the ego, we're not treating it as an enemy. We're just untying, we're bound, we're tied up to our ego sometimes. So we're just untying that to loosen, to create some space for us to reach our inner selves. So when we think of all of the things that we are, that we think that we are, think of them as things that we have. And you can't be what you have. I have a phone. I'm not this phone. This is something I have. So I go through and sort of say, okay, I have a body, but I'm not this body. I am what's aware of this body. I have sensations that come in through the lens of this, this body. I have uh, sight and hearing and touch, but I'm not those sensations. Those sensations are temporary. If I, turn my head, have completely different sensations than when I look straight ahead. Or if I touch this table or I touch my phone, I have different sensations. So I'm clearly not my sensations. Those are things I have. I have thoughts, I have emotions that arise, but I am not my thoughts and emotions because those things are temporary. They pass through. What is not temporary? As the observer. The observer remains the same. That's what I am. That's the only thing that I can be, is for now, is the observer, is the one who in which these experiences arise. And that is pure consciousness. Now, if we are able to drop back far enough, we start out by being individuated consciousness. We drop back beyond that and we can get into non duality, where we identify with universal consciousness. That, maybe you can do that instantaneously, or maybe it takes you a little while to get there. But this is a really important meditative practice to start loosening the bonds of ego, but also to start to really identify with experientially. Intellectually doesn't matter that much. It helps, right? If I explain this to you, if I say, hey, look, you're pure consciousness, and this body that you think is you is not you. This is just an appearance. Your experience of this body varies over time, but the experiencer does not. And so, what is it that's experiencing the body? Thoughts, emotions, perceptions, sensations. I can explain that to you intellectually, and that's great. But that's not having an experience of that until you go in and you do that work, right? You do that meditation. I have a body, I am not the body. Um, the Indian saint Sri Ramana Maharshi, his entire practice was about asking, what am I? That was it. What am I? And there are volumes and volumes of books written about him and his teachings and all this stuff. Very simple practice. He sat in a cave on a mountain, Aranchala mountain, and asked himself over and again. I mean, he had a very, I forget exactly what happened to him. He got sick or injured or something and had a spiritual awakening and left home at like 16 and went to this mountain and just started meditating. And his mom was frantic. Where's my son? Right. And like went to like somehow found out he had gone to this mountain and went to this mountain and found him, trying to convince him to come home. And instead, it's actually written down what he said to her. I forget exactly what it was, but it's something about, whatever is meant to be will be, and what is not meant to be will not be. And this, was basically describing that he is not the one doing this. He's just observing what this is. One meditative direction is be not the doer, right? Don't identify with the one that is doing actions. And so she had a spiritual awakening and stayed. So she went to bring him home. She stayed at the mountain, became enlightened, entered into a state of samadhi, died in his arms, conscious. She was conscious like fully conscious in a state of samadhi when she died. Which is, very in a lot of Eastern traditions, like that's a really important thing to happen is when you, if you can, when you die, to die in a state of awakened bliss. Um, you know, it, all sorts of stuff about it, but it prevents you from having to come back and learn. It's one of the ways that one of the things that prevents you from having to reincarnate on this earth and go through suffering and stuff again, escape the suffering. So that's the story. But his whole practice was inquiry, and I think inquiry is really, really useful, right? Inquiry is asking questions, not for verbal answers, but to have experiences. We're talking about spiritual inquiry. I'll do a whole talk about spiritual inquiry at some point because it's a beautiful, beautiful practice, and there are many, many different ways to do spiritual inquiry. And so you ask questions. If I am not the body, what am I? If I am not these thoughts, what am I? It's not to get a verbal answer. Well, I am pure consciousness. That da 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 da. No, it's to drop when you ask yourself questions. Your body. There's a This is a really good psychological tactic to use for like things like sales and stuff like that. Is the mind will always seek answers to questions, whether you consciously want to or not, even unconsciously. If I ask you right now, if you are not your body, what are you? Observe a shift in your consciousness. It'll happen. Yeah, meet death without fear. Death is coming for all of us. Why fear it? You know, we're this body mind is gonna die. Mm, billions of people have died before me. Probably trillions of life forms have died physically. Why fear it? It's just another part of life, just what happens. But also, when you get a real sense of your inner self, you realize that there's a part of you that never dies. Yeah, this body and mind is going to go away. It's going to become dust. The whole ashes to ashes, dust to dust thing, I always found interesting because most of the elements in our bodies come from stardust. So they are ash, they come from exploded stars. Um, you know, Everything except hydrogen and helium was born in a star. So the carbon in your body, the nitrogen in your body, everything else in your body except for hydrogen and helium, even oxygen, was born in the belly of a star that exploded at some point. And so we truly are ashes and dust, the physical parts of us. But when we're able to really quiet down and disidentify with this body, then we don't worry so much about this body dying. It's not to say I'm going to walk out in front of a bus because I'm, don't, there is a survival part of this body mind, but that's not who I am. I can observe the survival part. And again, if I'm being not the doer, I trust the survival part of this body mind. I trust it to do what it needs to do to stay alive. I trust it to drink its coffee, but no, my fruit bowl's not here. I usually have a fruit bowl. It's been moved. I usually have a fruit bowl here. I use fruit as props a lot. I also eat them, but I'm gonna have a banana right after this, and so this body mind knows, hey, you need to feed yourself, right? Have some fruit. Um, have a muffin, whatever. And this body will keep going, and I don't have to. This body mind will keep going, and I don't have to tell it what to do. And thinking that I have to tell it what to do is attaching to ego. So be not the doer. Try that. Try it for a while. You can try it for 2 seconds. Try it for 10 minutes. Be not the doer. Just observe. Sit back and observe. Observe what thoughts arise, if any. What'll happen is that your thoughts will start to slow down and quiet. Your ego's like stirring, keeping things stirring up. It's like one of those jugglers with that spins the plates on the end of stick, and they have to move frantically to keep all the plates spinning, or they'll fall off the sticks up in the air. So they got to constantly move. Well, that's what your ego is doing with your mind. Your ego's like, throw up all these thoughts to keep you distracted so that you don't disidentify with the ego. When you meditate deeply, um, your thoughts start to slow down and become more quiet. And so this is why meditation's a really good step, particularly, meditations like the ones I've described, but there are tons of them out there that quiet you down and get you to step back away. And so even if the ego starts to throw thoughts up, you're like, okay, that's fine. That's a thought. It's an interesting thought. Actually, interesting is a judgment. So don't even judge them. Interesting, not interesting. Helpful, harmful. No judgment, just neutral. Equanimity. Um, in Japan, uh, there's a god, Fudomyu. Fudomyu means unmovable mind, and statues of this god. It's really gruff-looking guy holding. I don't know if he's holding a. I don't think it's a sword. I think it's a cudgel. And the idea is he's unmovable, right? This is a very gruff exterior to equanimity, meaning no matter what thought or feeling comes up, I don't feel I'm still identifying with this permanent part of myself that is at peace, that is at bliss. My house could be on fire. My body and mind will take care of getting me out of it. But I don't like, oh my, I don't lose my stuff. I don't have to. And so I really, really drop in, and the mind starts to quiet down. But when it's not, I also don't think I'm the one who's doing the thinking. I'm just observing the thoughts. And so with that, how long have I been talking? Where's my? Oh, there we are. I've been talking a little over an hour. I'm gonna wrap so I can start my day. I've got some client stuff to do and all this stuff. I hope everyone has a good start to their week. The start of my week was about 4 inches of really sticky, wet snow out there. It's very beautiful though because it's clinging to the trees and everything else. Very beautiful morning start to my week. Um, so take some time. I'll leave you with this. Take some time to quiet down, do some inquiry with yourself. What am I if I am not this body? If I am not the stories I tell about myself, right? Even I say I've got ADHD. That's a story about who I am, about my body, mind, and how it works. What if none of it's true? What if none of the stories I tell about myself are true? You're very welcome, and thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Yes, spiritual party people. Maybe we'll do one of these, but we'll do it like at night, and everybody can have a cocktail of their choice instead of coffee. And if you don't drink, then bring a soft drink or glass of juice. So thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Have a great day as well. So uh, I would just encourage you to take some time in quiet, do a little bit of inquiry. If I am not this body, what am I? If I am not my thoughts, what am I? Even just I saying those things, I can feel I can feel myself relaxing away from ego. So shaman mingle hour, and maybe we'll call it shamanic happy hour. Not sure. Yeah, but instead of shamanic coffee hour, we'll call it shaman's happy hour or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll do one in the evening or something at some point. I don't often do them because I'm busy, usually pretty busy in the evenings, but um, at some point. Anyway, love to you all, and enjoy the rest of your week until I talk to you again. And take care.